is Your Health, a podcast of the Integrated Health and Social Services University Network for West-Central-Montreal.
Hello and welcome to Your Health. I'm Barry Morgan. We are discussing a very difficult situation, how to talk to children about advanced illness and death of a loved one. This podcast is about the importance of keeping kids informed. It's about what children need to know and what language to use and what language not to use as well. With me is Vivian Myron, social worker in palliative care, as well as clinical coordinator of the oncology social workers at the Jewish General Hospital, member facility of CIUSSS West-Central-Montreal. Thanks very much for being here, first of all.
My pleasure.
So, should we tell children the truth when a family member is very sick and facing death, or should we, in a sense, hide it from them to protect them?
So that's a great question. You know, all parents want to protect their children, but there are reasons why we do tell the kids the truth. And I think sometimes when parents understand that, they realize it is essential. So when you are telling the truth to your child, you are honoring your child. You are telling your child that you respect them. You're also letting them know that they have a very important role in the family. And it also allows them to know that they can trust you, that they can come to you and they know that they will get the truth. You're also letting them know that they're a very important part of the family and that when the family is facing tragedy, they face it together as a family and not as individuals. The other thing is that if you don't tell children about what's going on, kids have amazing imaginations. And generally, they're going to think the worst because you don't want ever a child to feel isolated from what's going on in the family or worrying and not knowing what's happening. You also don't want them to find out from a stranger. And if they do find out from a stranger, they may stop trusting you.
Right. So there's a lot of issues at play here.
Oh, absolutely.
How do you actually describe death to, say, a 4 or 5-year-old child?
So the important thing is to actually use the words dying, death, dead. People try to use pass away. They try to use many different words and euphemisms. It doesn't work. Children really work very well with the real words. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to say them, but it's very important to use them.
What happens? What do you do if a child just can't handle that?
You have to allow the child to be able to speak about their feelings. I also just want to go back a little bit to in terms of what to say.
Okay.
Because there's also very important to distinguish sick from very, very, very sick. So it's really important to use very, very, very 3 times. Or even 4 times, because you want to distinguish very, very, very sick from somebody who has a cold that's just sick.
It has to be really clear, in other words.
Yes.
You want to make sure that
you want it to be really clear and not to play games. Be really clear that they're very, very sick.
I understand. Okay, so you actually use the words, and again, I think you suggested if a child is going to have some sort of reaction, which is completely natural.
You need to listen to them. But you'd be surprised in terms of how children react. So very, very young children, if you're going to tell them some very tragic news, and sometimes even the fact that perhaps their parent or their uncle or their grandparent died, they will go to playing because that is a normal way for children to process very difficult situations. So often their teenage child may go and play basketball or get back on their computer or might be texting their friends and adults around get quite upset and frustrated and go, oh my God, what's wrong with them? Why aren't they grieving? Well, that is their way of grieving. That is their way of processing. Little children, especially small children, have to play. And you really have to be aware that if they're not playing, then there's a problem and you might have to intervene.
It's their way of coping.
Absolutely, and processing big emotions.
So be honest.
Well, be honest, but also speaking in words that they understand, words that they can, you can even use boo-boo. You can say, Daddy has a very big boo-boo and it's getting much worse. And the doctors and the nurses are doing everything they can to help Daddy and his boo-boo, but the medicines aren't working.
Would it be wrong, Vivian, to tell a child that death is like sleep?
Yes. We should never, ever compare death to sleeping.
Why?
Because you don't ever want a child to be afraid of sleeping. You don't want them to ever misunderstand. And there's very simple ways to explain what death is without ever using the term sleep. And you can just talk about the body and what's not working. The tummy doesn't hurt anymore. anymore. The eyes don't see. The tummy doesn't get hungry. They're feeling no pain. They don't hear. The arms don't work. The legs don't work. It's really more using the body parts and how they no longer function.
And how do you get children themselves to communicate about these very difficult issues?
So that's really tough because kids very often will not tell you about their feelings. And so there's many different ways. Sometimes it starts with the parents sharing their own feelings and talking about how sad and not being afraid to show children that they're sad. Very often people don't want their children to see them crying. If it's controlled, it's okay for children to see them crying, and you can share about how sad and how frustrated and how difficult this is. There's also techniques that as a social worker, I have taught parents how to communicate with their children, and I often do this through art. And it's really having a color represent a feeling and then having them draw whatever they want in proportion to that feeling. So let's say if red is angry, then the amount of anger they feel is what, if they feel 50% angry, then 50% of the drawing should be anger. And that is quite remarkable because then you can go through each of the aspects of their drawing to talk about those feelings and how does that feel physically and what helps you to deal with those feelings. What is it that is it for some child it might be to go play basketball, for another one might be to read, for another one it's to speak to their friend. There's many different ways how children cope, but they can tell you what helps them when they feel certain emotions.
What about older kids?
Older kids, well,
10
teenagers,
old, 12.
10, 12.
Let's say 10 to 15.
Well, 10 and 12, that actually works really well with, actually. And I think because they're still young enough, it's the teenagers that it gets a little bit tougher. They're dealing with not being dependent, and then especially if they lose a parent, it's devastating. It's devastating for all children when they lose a parent, And that's why one of the most important things that you need to get across to your child is that no matter what, they will be taken care of. This is the most important need because most kids, that's their biggest worry is who's going to take care of me. And I've even had situations where you have one parent who is the well one, and the child goes, well, what if you die? Who's going to take care of me? And they literally will have a written list of all the different people that will take care of them if something should happen to them.
Okay.
Because the reality is you can't tell a child, don't worry, I'm not going to die, when they've already learned that that's a possibility.
Do kids sometimes blame themselves? Would they
Very often. So that's a very good point. It's extremely important to let children know that they did not cause the illness. And this might sound ridiculous, but actually, I have not yet had a situation where a child didn't blame themselves. But the usual response by a child is to say, no, of course, I know I didn't blame myself. However, it's important to respond to that. The parent can respond to that by saying, oh, I'm so pleased because you're absolutely right. You absolutely could not cause it. But I'm so happy you don't believe you did because you're not going to believe it. Most kids actually do believe they may have had done something that caused it. And then sure enough, they're going to find out a story about how this was caused. At a 9-year-old boy, he was convinced that because he had come home from a science class saying that he was told that, in the body creates cancer every day and the immune system destroys it. And he was sure by telling his mother that he had depressed her immune system.
Wow.
So, it was very helpful. The whole team got involved in terms of explaining to him how he could not possibly have caused it. And teenagers will tell you, yeah, no way, I know I didn't cause this. And then a few minutes later, they might say, I caused my mother so much stress. And I've heard stress can be related to cancer, can cause cancer. So, it's very rare that a child doesn't feel that they've had something role to play in this. So yeah, kids are amazing. I have lots of stories like this.
That's a lot of stuff to walk around with for a young kid.
Oh my God, but children do.
So I
or
guess,
they think in their heads even they wish them dead under didn't even say it, but they were so angry at their parent one day and they said, "Oh, I wish you would die," because that's a normal thing for a child when they're very, very angry to say to themselves. And so there's this magical thinking that they may have caused it.
Would it be fair to say the takeaway here, Vivian, is that you want to be honest with children?
Absolutely.
Even very young children, but using age-appropriate language.
Absolutely. And if anybody is going through this, has a cancer diagnosis or has a very advanced illness, they can ask to speak to professionals. They can ask to speak to a social worker. They can ask to speak with someone who can help them in terms of communicating with their children.
Vivian, thank you
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate your time. Vivian Myron is a social worker in palliative care and clinical coordinator of the oncology social workers at the Jewish General Hospital, member facility of CIUSSS West-Central-Montreal. And that's it for this edition of Your Health. Thank you for your time. To hear our previous programs, you can find them at podcast.ciusswestcentral.ca. That's podcast.ciussss westcentral.ca, and let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to explore in the future. I'm Barry Morgan. Until next time.
You've been listening to Your Health, a podcast of the Integrated Health and Social Services University Network for West Central Montreal.